The BFG settled himself comfortably in his chair and crossed his legs. Dreams is very mysterious things. They is floating around in the air like little wispy misty bubbles, and all the time they is searching for sleeping people. Can you see them? Never at first. Then how do you catch them if you can't see them? Aha, said the BFG. Now we is getting onto the dark and dusky secrets. A dream, as it goes whiffling through the night air, is making a tiny little buzzing humming noise. But this little buzzy hum is so silvery soft it is impossible for a human being to be hearing it. Can you hear it? The BFG pointed up at his enormous truck-wheel ears, which he now began to move in and out. Is you seeing these? How could I miss them? Sophie said. They may be as looking a bit preposterous to you, but you must believe me when I say they is very extra-usual ears indeed. They is not to be coughed at. They is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing. You mean you can hear things that I can't hear? You is deaf as a dumpling compared with me. You is hearing only thumping loud noises with those little earwigs of yours, but I am hearing all the secret whisperings of the world. Such as what? In your country, I is hearing the footsteps of a ladybird as she goes walking across a leaf. Honestly? What's more, I is hearing those footsteps very loud. When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her feet going clumpety, clumpety, clump like giant's footsteps. Good gracious me, Sophie said. What else can you hear? I is hearing the little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil, and sometimes, on a very clear night, and if I is swiggling my ears in the right direction, and here he swiveled his great ears upwards, so that they were facing the ceiling. If I is swiggling them like this, and the night is very clear, I is sometimes hearing far-away music coming from the stars in the sky. A queer little shiver passed through Sophie's body. My ears is what told me you was watching me out of your window last night, the BFG said. But I didn't make a sound, Sophie said. I was hearing your heart beating across the road, loud as a drum. Go on, please. I can hear plants and trees. Do they talk? They's not exactly talking, but they is making noises. For instance, if I come along and I is picking a lovely flower, if I is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, then plant is screaming and screaming very clear. You don't mean it. How awful! Is that really true? You think I is swizfiggling you? Well, it is rather hard to believe. Then I is stopping right here, said the BFG sharply. I is not wishing to be called a fibster. Oh, no, I'm not calling you anything. I believe you. Please, go on. The BFG gave her a long, hard stare. Sophie looked right back at him, her face open to his. I believe you, she said softly. She had offended him, she could see that. So do, please forgive me and go on, she said. The BFG waited a while longer, and then he said, Such wonderful and terrible sounds I is hearing. Some of them you never wish to be hearing yourself. But some is like glorious music. He seemed almost to be transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions. Tell me some more about them, Sophie said quietly. You just ought to be hearing the little mices talking. Little mices is always talking to each other, and I is hearing them as loud as my own voice. Who else do you hear? Sophie asked. One of the biggest chat bags is the cattle piddlers, the BFG said.
What do they say?
They is arguing all the time about who is going to be the prettiest buttery fly.
Is there a dream floating around in here now? Sophie asked.
The BFG moved his great ears this way and that, listening intently. He shook his head. There is no dream in here, he said, except in the bottles. I has a special place to go for catching dreams. They's not often come into giant country.
How do you catch them?
Well, same way you's catching buttery flies with a net. The BFG stood up and crossed over to a corner of the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was about 30 feet long, and there was a net on the end of it. Here is the dream catcher. Every morning I's going out and snitching new dreams to put in my bottles.
Suddenly, he seemed to lose interest in the conversation.
I's getting hungry. He said it is time for eats.
But if you don't eat people, what do you live on?
That is a squelching tricky problem around here. In this slosh-flunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It is called the snozzcumber.
The snozzcumber? Cried Sophie. There's no such thing.
The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday we wasn't believing in giants, was we? Today we is not believing in snozzcumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something where there are two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly scotchhopper?
I beg your pardon? Sophie said.
And the humple crimp and the rat rascal.
Are they animals? Sophie asked.
They is common animals. I is not a very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool.
You mean cotton wool?
What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozzcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest-looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black, with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse knobbles. Here is the repulsant snozzcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squaggle it, I mispize it, I dispunge it. But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I'll be nothing but skin and groans.
You mean skin and bones?
I know it is bones, the BFG said. But please understand that I cannot be helping it if sometimes I is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time.
The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude.
There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly.
But couldn't your mother have taught you?
My mother? Giants don't have mothers. Surely you was knowing that.
I didn't know that.
Well, who ever heard of a woman giant? There never was woman giant, and there never will be. Giants is always men.
In that case, how were you born?
Giants isn't born. Giants appears.
And when did you appear? Sophie asked.
Now, how on earth could I be know anything like that? So long ago I couldn't count.
You mean you don't even know how old you are?
Well, no giant is knowing that. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old. Very, very old and crumply. Perhaps as old as the earth.
What happens when a giant dies?
Giants is never dying. Sometimes, quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing, and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to, but mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers.
The BFG was still holding the awesome snozcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end of it into his mouth and bit off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice.
"Ugh, it's filthing,"
he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way.
"Ugh, that's disgustous. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozcumber."
"No, thank you," Sophie said, backing away.
"That's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it. Go on, you snipsy little winkle, have a go."
Sophie took a small nibble.
"Oh, no! Oh, gosh! Oh, help!"
She spat it out quickly.
"It tastes of frog skins and rotten fish. Do we really have to eat it?" "You do, unless you is wanting to become so thin you'll be disappearing into a thick air."
"Into thin air? A thick air is something quite different." Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes.
"Words is all such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life. I know exactly what words I'm wanting to say, but somehow or other they is all getting squiddled around."
"That happens to everyone."
"Not like it happens to me."
"I think you speak beautifully."
"You do?"
cried the BFG, suddenly brightening.
"That is the nicest present anybody has given me in my whole life. Are you sure you is not twiddling my leg?"
"Of course not. I just love the way you talk."
"How wonder-crump! How whoopsie-splunkers!"
"Listen, we don't have to eat snozcumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting?" The BFG raised his great hand proudly in the air.
"I is a very honourable giant. I would rather be chewing up rotsome snozcumbers than snitching things from other people."
"You stole me."
"I didn't steal you very much," said the BFG, smiling gently. "After all, you is only a tiny little gal."